Hi, welcome back to Psych Alchemy. Today I wanted to talk about some of the communication challenges that I observe working with people, and hopefully it can help you maybe see where you struggle. So, if you listen to this video and all you think of is the other people that struggle, I really invite you to turn the attention back to yourself because you don't have communication breakdowns and it's completely one-sided. I've never actually seen that. Oftentimes, people become, so that would be the first thing, is recognizing what you bring to the conversation. So oftentimes when I'm working with families or couples, one of the very common presentations is obviously each person is fed up. They spend, I like to just ask them what's going on so that I can get an idea of their insight into themselves. So if the main thing is focused on what the other person brings that damages the relationship, that's a first huge barrier. So one of the pieces is we have to bring in recognizing our own challenges. So sometimes when I work with people, what I invite them to do is each person identify what they know they bring that damages the relationship and bring that up, each person or in the family. Because what tends to happen is when we're frustrated or hurt, we just start to become very defensive and very judgmental towards the other person and just highlight everything that they're doing wrong in succession without very much acknowledgement of our own wrongdoings. So when you're able to do that, when you're able to, for example, I know when I'm in relationships, I'm quite um, avoidant at times. And so that's what I would bring into the conversation is I recognize that I am avoidant and and then be curious as to the other person's experience of that. So instead of going in saying the flip side would be if I go in and say you just need too much from me all the time. So that person's going to automatically probably start to shut down because I'm not taking responsibility for the fact that um, one, I don't get everything I want in relationships. If that's what you want in a relationship, then you probably won't find one that will last. Um, and I'm not taking responsibility for the fact that I'm definitely not easy to be with. And if you think that you are, but you're in painful relationships. So one thing that's really common is when I work with someone and they tell me that everyone around them is emotionally unavailable, that actually means they're emotionally unavailable. Because they're picking people who are emotionally unavailable so that they don't have to be raw and then they can blame the other person. I've never met someone who says something like that, that as I work with them, I don't start seeing how emotionally unavailable they are. Sometimes what happens is in certain relationships, we are emotionally available, so we use that as an example. With my best friend, I'm open, but you're not with this person. That's part of the issue. So some of the things that we can do, other than what I've talked about, is when you identify what you want, just ask for that and bring that up. But listen to the other person's response. So sometimes there's nothing wrong with what we want, but we often pick people who can't give us that. And then we are very upset with them. So we want to express what we want, but if someone consistently can't meet that, then it's really important to really consider, is this something I can work with? And if it's not, I don't need to stay and punish them. So that's a really common thing that I see with people is they want something, the person can't give it to them. And so they're kind of going, I imagine it's a lot like their childhood. They go around just shaming and punishing them over and over and over with the assumption, the incorrect assumption, that if they do it enough, the person will fall into suit. But what tends to happen is the other person becomes more frustrated, more resistant, more defensive, which actually starts to break down more. So we have to look at how what is the person saying and what are they doing. So another thing that happens a lot is people will say something like they never communicate, they never communicate. So some people don't communicate a lot verbally, but they do communicate a lot with their actions. So if someone is saying, if you're bringing up what you want and the person says, okay, I'll do it, but then they don't do it, they're actually communicating to you, I'm not going to do that. So in conflict, oftentimes, many people are conflict averse. And so, in an attempt to end the conflict, they'll agree to whatever the person's saying. And oftentimes, what I see when someone's doing that, they're also threatening the person on some level. So, when people are threatened, they either, the trauma response would be run, freeze, fight, or people please. So, many people please. Okay, I'll do that. Don't leave me, this and that. But after you do that, if you find that they never follow through, they are communicating with you. And there's been a lot of people I've worked with where I've had to point that out, that this person is consistently communicating that they will not do that. You're banging your head against the wall and punishing them, but they're pretty clear with what they're doing, not with what they're saying. So kind of that actions speak louder than words. Look at the actions. You don't want, for some people, all of their connections and relationships are just filled with conflict and tension. And that's also important to notice. If all my relationships are filled with conflict and tension, the only common denominator is you. And there comes a point where it becomes very important to start to look at that, not blaming the other person. So some other things is listen with curiosity versus judgment. So very often when I'm working with people, they are not listening to the other person. They're basically listening to wait their turn to attack. And so oftentimes what I will do for people is, if they'll let me, is to listen, don't cut the person off. And then reflect back what you heard, because most of the time what we hear in close relationships is not what the person's saying. Many times, because I'm a third party, so I'm not part of that relationship. When the other person says, this is what you said, I'll often have to say, they actually didn't say that. I'm not sure where you got that from. And that's helpful because oftentimes we hear what we want to hear that aligns with our judgment and our narrative of ourself. And so we often destroy our own relationships because of us, not other people actually. So we want to be curious and help figure out, why do you feel that way? Where does that come from? So a couple other things is trying to practice empathy. So often when we're hurt, we're so obsessed with our own pain and our own needs that we're not really thinking about the other person and what they're going through. Because oftentimes we feel like all of our needs need to be met by this person, so there's no space for empathy because we're very self centered in that moment. I need this, you need to give me this. And then we often have a narrative that we give so much and we're so easy and this isn't fair and those kind of things. But if that's truly the case, why are we there? That becomes something really important when I hear someone say they're always like this and that, and it's like, well, then why are you there? I don't know. Okay, so it's important to figure out there's a reason that you're still there. And there's a chance that you are becoming very exaggerated in an effort to, one, justify your feelings. So you can be frustrated in a relationship and nothing too big is happening. And then to justify your your aggression and judgments, instead of developing empathy for the other person and recognizing that some people are not capable of certain things. So many people that I work with, they often replicate their childhood. So if they had a parent who was emotionally unavailable and judgmental, they'll often unconsciously find someone that's the same way. And then they're just so angry and upset. But what's happening is they're just recreating their childhood wound. This person can't do any different. It doesn't mean it's okay, but what it means is, why are you picking someone like that? You know, that is something to really contemplate and take more probably to individual therapy. Is, I notice this pattern, and part of it has to be me. It can't all be other people. when we have kind of a victim mentality, it's always like life does me wrong, I can never catch a break. That is a very dangerous place to reside in. Of course, you'll have moments where that happens, but to reside in that is very painful and often blinds you to the reality. So another piece is look at your non-verbals. So you can say, I care about you and I want to change, but your tone, your eye movements, your and your rolling your eyes, those are all communicating. And many times people are very unaware of their nonverbals. That's why they feel like, I don't understand why they're attacking me. And it's like, well, but you were pretty dismissive of what they were saying. As they were talking, you rolled your eyes. Well, I just feel frustrated. That's okay. You can do that, but you're not then a victim of the circumstance because you're adding fuel to the fire, and and that becomes really important. The other piece is really understanding that if your goal in your conflicts is who wins and who loses and who's right and who's wrong, that is fundamentally not going to work for relationships. That's what happens in abusive relationships, where everything is about power and control. Who has power? Who has control? Healthy relationships are about connection, about understanding the other and connecting and expressing needs, not gaining power or control or criticizing. Those are all patterns that are not going to necessarily be helpful with healthy communication. Another thing is respecting differences and respecting issues that are not solvable. So within relationships, the research shows, I believe it's 70 to 80% of the issues in a relationship will never be solved. We have to learn, we need to have strategies for how to deal with the unsolvable parts. Not taking every issue and thinking, I have to find a solution, we have to find a compromise, we have to, because you probably shouldn't do relationships if that's the case, because that's not reasonable. There are going to be things where you just don't see eye to eye. There are going to be things where you can't solve them, and of course, if that's a bottom line, then address that and move on. Again, don't stay and punish. There's so many people that I work with that is their life, is they pick someone who is not going to work for them because they have a lot of emotional needs and the other person doesn't, or vice versa. Someone who doesn't have a lot of emotional needs, supposedly, pick someone who's incredibly needy, and then they're constantly criticizing them. That's not working. Another thing is practicing compromises. So when we compromise, we part of the adult part has to understand that most of the time you will not get what you want all the way. And if you have that attitude, you're going to struggle in connections. You might get a piece of what you want, but you also have to give too. So I hope those are helpful in understanding some of the pitfalls with communication and what is more realistic. Because when we start to really struggle with communication, we're often moving into usually a more child place, a more younger place where our mind is kind of fixed and set. But we also have to figure out how to grow up and recognize the realities of life, and also recognize that we are not forced to stay. If something isn't working, you can leave. But if you choose to stay, again, you can't punish the person. That doesn't work, that doesn't make sense. So thank you.